Before we begin today's episode, just a reminder to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you enjoy this episode. Millions of people flock to cruise ships every year to sail to beautiful places, experience more of the world, or just to have a good time away from the strains of everyday life. In some of those cases, though, dream vacations turn into nightmares and someone doesn't come home. In Merrian Carver's case, that's exactly what happened. 40-year-old Marion embarked on a cruise from Seattle through Alaska, ending in Vancouver in August of 2004. However, this wasn't just a typical vacation. She booked passage just 2 days before the voyage, arrived with very little luggage, and told no one where she was going. When she didn't return home, her family began searching. The cruise line was anything but cooperative with the investigation, concealing names, not allowing interviews with staff, failing to turn over documents, and ultimately claiming that Marion had taken her own life by jumping overboard. However, there are many questions about her last night aboard that ship and who, if anyone, may have been spending time with her and perhaps had a reason to make her disappear. This is Trace Evidence, Episode 112, The Disappearance of Merrian Carver. Welcome to Trace Evidence. I'm your host, Stephen Pacheco. Today we examine a truly mysterious case of a cruise ship disappearance. Before getting into that case, just a few notes about the show. Trace Evidence is a weekly true crime podcast focused on unsolved murders and disappearances. You can follow Trace Evidence on Twitter at TraceEvPod, Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, or by searching Facebook for Trace Evidence. The show is also on MeWe and Minds. If you're interested in supporting the show and getting some Trace Evidence merchandise, there's a Patreon at patreon.com/traceevidence, or you can donate via PayPal. Visit trace-evidence.com for all social media links, donating options, and contact information to submit case suggestions, or you can email me directly at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. On today's episode, we examine a bizarre cruise ship disappearance, one that does not get a lot of attention. This is episode 112, The Disappearance of Merrian Carver. Domingo Montero made his way through the passages of the Mercury, a celebrity cruise ship owned and operated by parent company Royal Caribbean. Montero knocked on door number 8137, a stateroom that, according to his manifest, was booked by a young couple with a baby. Montero was surprised to find the door answered by a single woman, Merrian Carver, who wasn't married and certainly didn't have a baby with her. Assuming it was merely a paperwork error, perhaps the result of passengers being moved to a different stateroom, he walked in and introduced himself to the red-headed 40-year-old who was wearing a blue dress and long-sleeved blouse. As Montero looked around, he was surprised at the situation. The young woman didn't appear to have brought much luggage for the cruise, which disembarked from Seattle and would sail through Canadian waters, making several stops along the way in both Canada and Alaska before disembarking in Vancouver 7 days later. There were 2 small bags, later described as handbags, but no suitcases. This was somewhat unusual, as when most people went on a multi-day cruise, they'd at least have brought different outfits for each day and night of the cruise, but he didn't think much about it at the time. An article written by The Province, a newspaper out of Vancouver, went on to explain that Montero chatted with Marion about her plans for that first night, and she told him that while she'd be going upstairs, she didn't plan on going to the dining room. Montero performed his work as a cabin attendant and explained to Marion that he'd be back in the morning for turn-down service. Marion was polite, kind, and had a compelling smile. According to Montero, there didn't seem to be anything off, and if nothing else, Marion seemed relaxed and looking forward to the cruise. Over the course of the next 36 hours, Montero would see Marion several times before she vanished from the ship without a trace. Of course, while Montero has spoken at length about Marion's openness and her penchant for polite conversation, her family, thousands of miles away, didn't even know she had left home, let alone hopped on a cruise ship without so much as a passing comment about her plans. Marion was the oldest of 4 daughters born to Kendall and Carol Carver, her sisters being Kendra, Lee, and Christine. Kendall had worked as the president of Washington National Insurance, based out of New York, and so the Carver children grew up primarily on the East Coast in nearby Connecticut. Marion was described as a bright, vivacious young woman who cherished her privacy and wrote poetry in her spare time. There was something about Marion's internal existence which was beyond understanding, and yet she had her own way of translating all of those complex thoughts and emotions to the written word. Marion attended Darien High School, which boasted a top-tier education and some of the highest SAT scores in the state. When Marion left to attend Simmons College, located in the Boston area, she fell in love with the location, and while she did return home to Connecticut, there was something about New England which continued to draw her attention. Kendall retired in 1995, leaving Washington National as the CEO, a position he first took in 1977. After all those years of living in the grind, he was ready to enjoy a slower, more relaxed lifestyle. Arizona seemed like the right place, a location not unfamiliar with East Coasters looking to escape the cold winters in search of a warmer, laid-back existence. However, when the Carvers made their plans, Marion had something very different in mind. Having graduated from college years prior and now working a career in investment banking, her sights were set to the landscape she'd fallen in love with in college. With nothing to tie her down, it was time for her to indulge her love for Massachusetts, and she began making plans to settle outside of Boston. Life was going well for Marion. She settled in Cambridge, worked as an investment banker, and eventually met a man and fell in love. Marion got married and shortly thereafter became a mother, having a daughter she named Rachel. Rachel quickly became the center of her universe, and family and friends have spoken at length about not only Marion's love for her daughter, but her own personality as well. Words which are often repeated are strong, independent, and intelligent. When asked about his daughter, Kendall Carver described her by saying, quote, "She's an attractive, sophisticated lady. She was quite the overachiever." End quote. Other descriptors I've come across have been full of personality and charismatic. Unfortunately, Marion would suffer a heavy emotional blow as her marriage slowly degraded, and in 2000, the couple divorced. In many articles, the divorce itself has been called nasty, and while details haven't been too abundant, it seems that her ex-husband was able to achieve custody of their daughter, something which truly shattered Marion's life. While there were frequent phone calls, this was hardly a replacement for in-person contact, and those around Marion reported that she entered a deep depression. In the aftermath of the divorce, Marion reportedly went through somewhat of a breakdown, which at its worst resulted in her making threats of suicide, though she never did anything to suggest there was anything more behind them than simply her own grief and pain. No actions were followed through. Instead, she disappeared for a month, telling no one where she was going, taking the time to clear her head and get some space. When she returned, Marion began the difficult process of pulling herself out of it, and in the 4 years that passed, friends and family have all said that she was back to her normal self. When asked about his daughter in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Kendall told the province, quote, "I had talked to Marion several times in August. There was no indication at all of any problem." End quote. For a family which was well aware of the struggle she had gone through, there were none who felt she was falling back into it, and instead, everyone reported she was doing better and was back to her old self. On August 25th, 2 days before the Mercury cruise ship would sail away from Seattle, Marion placed a call and purchased a ticket for the 7-day voyage. For whatever reason, she didn't tell anyone, not friends, and not family. No one knew of her plans to go on the cruise, although her father would later tell investigators that it wasn't exactly out of the ordinary for her to go on trips without letting anyone know. She liked her privacy, and she appreciated the ability to go out, clear her mind, relax, and not feel the compulsion to let everyone know exactly what and where she was going. She was an independent woman who could take care of herself and didn't necessarily find it pertinent to report her every movement. While some would later find this behavior strange, there were few, if any, in Marion's life who thought it was out of character. Marion set off on her trip, flying to Seattle. She booked a round-trip ticket which would bring her back to Boston following the cruise, but she'd never get on that plane. In fact, whether or not she left the cruise itself is a topic which is still open for debate. Surveillance cameras operated by the cruise line recorded her boarding the ship with her two little bags on Friday, August 27th, but any footage that may have been captured after that is also up for debate and would become the subject of lawsuits and hearings after Marion herself had vanished. Marion was issued a Sea Pass, a sort of credit card to be used for all purchases while on the ship. The cards are backed by either cash, credit, or debit cards registered with the cruise line. A final report of all expenses is delivered to each passenger before disembarking, but an examination of records later showed that Marion never used her card for even a single purchase. Marion chose a beautiful ship to cruise on, the Mercury, which is now under the operation of a German tourism company, TUIAG, and it's since changed its name. In 2004, though, it sailed under the Celebrity Cruise banner and contained 935 luxury staterooms, 639 of which offered ocean views. Many of the luxury rooms also came with their own private verandas. However, Marion had gone with a less opulent choice, possibly due to the late booking of her ticket, and instead took a stateroom which was an outside cabin with a sealed window and no balcony. According to ShipTechnology.com, the primary attraction of the ship was the Manhattan restaurant, which spanned 2 levels and had as its centerpiece a 4-story grand foyer. However, despite all of these amenities, Marion seemed less interested in exploring the ship and its many forms of entertainment, including a 1,000-seat celebrity theater which spans 2 floors. Instead, the 40-year-old appeared to be more interested in her privacy and spending time alone. On the morning of Saturday, August 28th, the first full day of the cruise, cabin attendant Domingo Montero saw Marion again after offering services and checking her room the previous night. Montero was making his rounds with his assistant, whose name he couldn't recall at a later deposition, when they knocked once again on the door to Marion's stateroom. According to Montero, Marion answered the door in a long blouse and her underwear, letting the men in to clean up the room. Again, upon this encounter, Montero reported that she seemed to be in good spirits and was polite, as she had been the night before. Marion's movements on the ship that day are unknown, whether due to a lack of documentation or her absence from surveillance cameras, which has never been quite clear. But again, she never used her Sea Pass and seemed to be avoiding the dining room. At approximately 7:45 p.m., Montero returned to her room for turn-down services, which included changing out sheets, freshening up the room, and, as was customary, placing a chocolate on the pillow. This time when he arrived, Montero once again found Marion in her room alone. According to his deposition, he handed Marion a menu for the dining room, but she informed him that she'd be staying in her cabin. Instead, Montero offered room service, and Marion ordered 2 sandwiches. 15 minutes later, at approximately 8 p.m., Montero returned with both sandwiches, each on its own plate and both on a tray. This was the last time Montero, or reportedly anyone else, would see Marion. The next morning, Sunday the 29th, Montero arrived at Marion's room for his morning rounds at approximately 10:30 a.m. For the first time since she'd been on the ship, when Montero knocked on the door, there was no answer. After knocking several times and receiving no response, Montero let himself into the room and thought the scene was a bit strange. Marion's bed had clearly not been slept in, as it was in the same condition he'd left it the night before. When he turned to pick up the tray and plates he delivered the sandwiches on, to his surprise, they were gone. Instead, on the desk, Montero found $107 in cash lying next to a name card with his name on it. In addition to this, Marion's bags were next to the table, which held her lamp, and there was also a small manila envelope, though Royal Caribbean has never explained what happened to that envelope nor what it contained. In her bags were her purse, social security card, and several compact discs, which were later found to contain poems she had written. In the closet hung Marion's dress, the only one that had ever been in the room. Her sandals, the only footwear she had brought with her, were also left behind. The only items missing from Marion's room, other than Marion herself, were her passport, billfold, and jewelry. None of these items have ever been accounted for. Being somewhat thrown off by the way the room appeared and Marion's absence, rather than taking the money and going about his business, Montero left the money behind and reported Marion's absence to his supervisor. Over the course of the next 5 days and the completion of the cruise, Montero would report Marion as missing every day. According to Montero's deposition, at one point his supervisor told him to forget about it and, quote, continue to do your job, end quote. Montero never felt right about the situation, but had passed it on to his supervisor, who, according to all records, never gave that information to his bosses, feeling that it was not a situation which would require them to sound alarm and disturb other cruise passengers. When the Mercury docked in Vancouver and all passengers disembarked, Montero once again spoke to his supervisor. This time, he was told to gather all of Marion's personal effects and bring them to the supervisor. Once Montero delivered the personal effects, clothing, the manila envelope, and the money, the supervisor took Marion's personal effects and placed them in his locker to secure them. However, Marion's clothing was donated to charity. No reports were filed, no notes made. The supervisor did absolutely nothing to address Marion's disappearance. Marion's family wouldn't discover their daughter was missing for several days, and it was not because of any contact from the cruise line. In fact, the cruise line never contacted the family, and it took the Carvers several tries to even speak with anyone working for Royal Caribbean. On Wednesday, September 1st, 4 days after Marion was last seen by cruise staff, Kendall Carver received a phone call from his 13-year-old granddaughter. Rachel explained to her grandfather that she'd been calling her mother for days but hadn't received an answer. Concerned, Kendall and Carol placed multiple calls to Marion's home but caught the answering machine every time. After leaving a series of messages, they began going through a list of names: family, friends, anyone who may have had contact with Marion in the past week, but no one had spoken to her. After trying to find their daughter for 2 days, when panic finally set in, they made a call to the Cambridge Police Department, who performed a wellness check but found no trace of Marion, no signs of foul play, and nothing to indicate where she may have been. After police found nothing, the Carvers continued searching on their own but kept coming up with dead ends. They, of course, began to worry about her state of mind, recalling how 4 years earlier she had struggled so much with her divorce and discussed the possibility of suicide. However, at that time, all Marion did was take a month away from it all and return full of energy and rejuvenated. They began to wonder if perhaps this was another one of those situations, but endless calls from her daughter and their own growing concerns wouldn't rest. Several days after the welfare check, the Carvers once again called the Cambridge police, this time filing a missing persons report. As an early step in the investigation, authorities pulled Marion's financial records and found that in late August, she had purchased a round-trip ticket to Seattle as well as a ticket on the Celebrity Cruise Mercury ship, which would leave Seattle and dock in Vancouver 7 days later. Over the course of the next month, Kendall was involved in multiple phone calls with the Cambridge police as well as Royal Caribbean. It took the cruise line 3 days to even confirm that his daughter had been on the ship. He was finally contacted by the manager of risk management for the cruise line, who explained that Marion hadn't been seen after the second night of the voyage, but assured the family that it wasn't uncommon for travelers to stay in others' rooms. Maybe she met someone else and decided to go with him or her. As for the belongings left behind, according to the Arizona Republic, Royal Caribbean told the family it was normal for passengers to leave items behind. In fact, it happened all the time. While her clothing had been donated for some reason, they were still in possession of other items, although not that manila envelope. The discs in Marion's purse were loaded into the computer and their contents emailed to Kendall. He and his family spent days poring over the poems on the discs, looking for clues but found nothing useful. The cruise line confirmed that they logged all passengers who exited and came back on the ship at stops along the way, but did not record who exited the ship at the final stop in Vancouver. There was no record of Marion ever leaving the ship, nor was there any record of her buying so much as a drink with her sea pass. Kendall spoke with Brian Branley, the detective assigned to Marion's case, and was told there wasn't much to work with. However, they did have enough information to press Royal Caribbean to file a missing persons report with authorities in Vancouver. Royal Caribbean, however, did not file a report in Vancouver and instead waited 5 weeks before reporting her disappearance to the FBI. The supervisor, who had ignored Montero's reports, was fired and ushered off the ship before any investigators could speak with him. The man, whose name has never been revealed, was a Greek national and returned home. While his address was later located, the man himself wasn't found, and it was assumed he took a job on another cruise line, possibly one operating in the Mediterranean. The missing persons report wasn't filed by Royal Caribbean until Marion had already been missing for a month. In desperation, Kendall hired one of the largest private investigation firms in the country, operated by a former San Francisco detective. 2 months after Marion's disappearance, in November of 2004, investigator Tim Schmolder was granted access to the Mercury while it was docked in Monterey. According to the Arizona Republic, Schmolder put in his report that he found the cruise manager defensive and that his time on the ship was limited to a few hours as there was a training course set for that day. At the time, the cruise line would not disclose Domingo Montero's name as the steward who had last seen Marion and serviced her room. This information wouldn't be revealed until subpoenas were later issued by investigating authorities. The only information given to Schmolder on this topic was that the steward was a male from India and that he was now working on a different ship. The hotel manager in charge of rooms and bookings was on vacation and therefore could not be interviewed. Schmolder was made aware that surveillance cameras were in place on the ship and that a security officer was in control of them. However, he was not allowed to speak with the security officer and was told that the tapes existed on a 3-week cycle, meaning that any footage from Marion's cruise would have already been taped over. It was later revealed that even after reports of Marion's disappearance from Montero, the items left behind and contact by the Cambridge police, no one had even reviewed the tapes. According to Schmolder, Marion's cabin was a short walk upstairs or up an elevator to an observation deck, which was approximately 100 feet above the waterline. While Schmolder reported that it's somewhat unlikely no one saw Marion walking up to the deck since she would have been in her underwear and jumping off, suicide couldn't be completely ruled out. He added, however, that it's also not impossible that someone pushed her off the ship. While Schmolder's report answered some questions, it opened the door to many others. Kendall was upset by the report, but primarily by the lack of cooperation from Royal Caribbean staff. In his opinion, they didn't seem interested in Marion's disappearance in the slightest and seemed more focused on moving away from it. Furious with the situation, Kendall hired lawyers operating out of Massachusetts and Florida to begin digging into the case. Subpoenas were issued, and finally, in January of 2005, 2 Royal Caribbean employees gave depositions by telephone. One of these employees was Domingo Montero, who stated emphatically that he had reported the disappearance multiple times and, in his opinion, Marion did not seem upset, out of sorts, sad, or angry. While Schmolder hadn't been able to speak with the hotel manager, he was the second man deposed. Christos Hadjipetris testified that the cruise line had conducted its own internal investigation into Marion's disappearance and that the supervisor had been fired. He continued on that as soon as Marion had been noted as missing, the information should have been delivered to ship officers and the captain, but this had not been done. In hopes of receiving additional information, Kendall wrote to Royal Caribbean's chairman of the board. Weeks later, he received a response saying that the company would hand over any information he requested. While Kendall requested a large amount of information, he was given only a copy of the security report about Marion's disappearance. This report acknowledged the failure of reporting her missing, pointed out that her possessions should not have been disposed of, explaining, quote, "Evidence found at the scene of an incident must be left where found and must not be touched. The ship's security staff must secure the scene and maintain the integrity of the incident scene, ensuring nothing is touched or tampered with until outside investigators arrive on board." End quote. Kendall also requested a list of passengers who may have been from the Boston area, wondering if Marion may have gone on the cruise to be with someone she knew. In the end, he was given only a list of passengers with no information about where they lived. Kendall later told the province, quote, "We got an alphabetical listing with no phone numbers, no addresses, no anything of 2,000 people. It was worthless." End quote. In March of 2005, the family held a ceremony for Marion, though they refused to call it a memorial. Her poetry was read, images displayed, and family and friends spoke of her life and their experiences with her. Sadly, the Carver family was divided, with some believing Marion was dead and others thinking she was still out there. Kendall believed his daughter was gone, but his wife didn't. Frustrated, angry, grieving, and feeling that Royal Caribbean was hiding information, Kendall did the only thing left that he could do. He filed a lawsuit. Over the next few months, Kendall was constantly in contact with the FBI and investigators, but Royal Caribbean had stopped communicating. The case finally went to court in Florida in August, nearly 1 year after Marion had vanished. In a move that shocked the Carver family, Royal Caribbean spoke to reporters and stated that it was their belief that Marion was dead and that she had taken her own life. Royal Caribbean issued an official statement saying, quote, "Miss Carver had severe emotional problems, had attempted suicide before, and appears to have committed suicide on our ship. The death of Merrian Carver is a horrible tragedy, but regrettably, there is very little a cruise line or resort or hotel can do to prevent someone from committing suicide." End quote. In response, Kendall told the Arizona Republic, quote, "This was just their way of trashing Marion. That's all this is. How do they know for sure she is dead? Do they know something we don't?" End quote. For the record, throughout all of my research, I have only found information saying that during her divorce, Marion commented about committing suicide. I have found nothing to suggest she ever attempted it. The Carver family in total spent $75,000 on lawyers and private investigators trying to get to the truth and never found it. Reeling from the situation and never finding his answers, Kendall did his best to put his grief to good use, hoping to help others avoid the same horrible situation. In 2006, he founded International Cruise Victims, a group created to draft and enforce legislation and, quote, "counter the cruise industry's extensive and self-promoting lobbyist efforts. By gathering and circulating more accurate information on cruise crimes, we can assist Congress with successfully regulating the cruise industry." End quote. In 2007, legislation was introduced to change laws regarding security and safety aboard cruise ships traveling both domestically and internationally. Kendall testified before a Senate subcommittee in 2008. Former Senator John Kerry out of Massachusetts helped lead the charge, addressing Marion's case, saying, quote, "Marion's story is not an isolated incident. Despite being owned by American citizens and headquartered in the United States, cruise ships operate under foreign flags, allowing them to avoid United States laws when they are beyond U.S. territorial waters. With respect to jurisdiction over crimes, the law is murky at best." End quote. On November 29, 2009, the Paradise Valley Church in Arizona unveiled and dedicated a statue in honor of Merrian Carver. The statue, called The Gift of New Life, depicts a young woman writing in her journal while admiring a butterfly. It's based on a poem written by Marion called The Butterfly. John Kyle, a senator from Arizona, wrote to the Carver family, in part saying, quote, "This beautiful statue will stand forever as a memorial to Marion's life and legacy, and also as a tribute to your steadfast commitment to honoring her through your service to other victims and their families." End quote. Kendall Carver, in several interviews, made note of an interesting detail. Carver claimed that the family had been contacted by a crew member aboard the Mercury when Marion vanished, who claimed that she may have been involved in some kind of a relationship with another crew member. Kendall later stated, quote, "This was a crew member on the ship, a former crew member on the ship. He has referred us to additional crew members on the ship, one of which we've been in communication with, and one of which has indicated that the story among the crew is that one of the individuals on that ship, one of the crew members, was involved with Marion. It's highly significant because it starts to answer all the questions that we've had on Marion. Why wasn't she reported missing? Why were her items at the end of the trip just put in storage or thrown away? If it's true, at this point it's hearsay, but it's coming from crew members." End quote. Kind of makes you wonder how much they investigated that supervisor who seemed so disinterested in Marion's disappearance and who took her personal effects into his locker, minus that manila envelope, of course. That's purely speculation at this point, but it's curious how his name has never been revealed. In 2010, the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act was passed, which addressed new safety regulations and, in part, put cruise lines in the position of having to pay out claims arising from passenger injuries and deaths in cases where they are found liable. Adding on to this, California Representative Doris Matsui introduced H.R. 5096, the Cruise Passenger Protection Act, which, in part, requires crimes on cruise vessels to be reported to the FBI. The act was introduced to the floor of Congress in November of 2019 and is waiting to be considered by a committee to be passed on to the Senate. 1 month later, on Monday, December 30th, Kendall passed away after a brief illness. For the last 15 years of his life, he was dedicated to finding justice for his daughter and working to protect others suffering from the same pain and grief. The Cruise Passenger Protection Act holds much of his beliefs, and it's a bill that he strongly supported. Kendall went to his grave never knowing what truly became of his daughter, and while he ultimately believed her to be deceased, he never gave up his fight in her honor to bring justice not only to Marion, but to all families who have lost loved ones aboard cruise ships. From 2000 to 2005, the FBI opened 305 investigations into crimes on cruise ships. 45% of those crimes were sexual assaults, 22% were physical assaults, 10% were missing persons, and 8% were death investigations. Since the year 2000, more than 200 people have disappeared from cruise ships. That is an average of 10 people per year. Merrian Carver disappeared from the celebrity cruise ship Mercury in August of 2004. She is officially listed as lost, injured, missing. Marion was last seen by cabin steward Domingo Montero on August 28th and is described as a Caucasian female with red hair and hazel eyes, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing approximately 100 pounds. If alive today, Marion would be 56 years old. Her case is currently open with the Cambridge Police Department as well as the Alaska Missing Persons Clearinghouse. Marion's disappearance has been little discussed in a world where some cruise ship disappearances have garnered a great deal of attention. Whether it's due to the possibility of suicide or the strong lobbying of the cruise line, many questions remain unanswered and unasked. Did Marion leap to her death, or could she have been pushed? Did she disembark in Vancouver, or perhaps another stop along the way? Or could someone have targeted Marion and killed or abducted her? While there are those who fight for these answers, there are also others who fight to keep what happens on cruise ships below deck without the prying eyes of investigators or grieved families. I've never been all that interested in taking a cruise. Maybe I've studied the Titanic a little too much, or maybe it's all these stories about people vanishing from them. I've heard the Amy Lynn Bradley case on a lot of podcasts and TV shows. It's really interesting. But before digging into some Alaska case files, I'd never heard of Merrian Carver. At first glance, most people consider it cut and dry. A woman who had struggled in the past with depression hops on a plane, flies from the East Coast to the West Coast, boards a cruise ship, and chooses to jump off in the midst of a horrible return to that dark depression. Makes sense, sad as it may be. Yet, the more you dig into this case, the more issues you find. The more questions, the more curiosities. What once seemed easy to define becomes more complicated, and all of those questions remain without answers. I don't fully know Marion's background. In all honesty, most of what I found has little to do with her past, and a lot more to do with her travels, the cruise, and the aftermath. However, while depression can be cyclical, it does seem strange to attribute a death to suicide 4 years after someone was dealing with depression. And it isn't like her depression was for no reason. How many people out there go through a dark period when a relationship ends, let alone a marriage? In a way, it felt to me like this was just a quick way to dismiss the case for the cruise line. She had mentioned suicide 4 years ago. It must have been suicide. While that's certainly a possibility, there are others. So let's begin there with Marion's possible state of mind and where it could have led. Let's face it, it's impossible to explore someone's mental state without actually speaking to them, and even if you try to take someone with proper training to come to legitimate conclusions, and even they get it wrong sometimes. So it seems a bit moot to try and diagnose Marion without anything, so let's just not do that. Let's focus on what we do know. Throughout her life, no one ever reported her being depressed, suicidal, or anything that would cause concern. When she's 36 and has a child, she gets a divorce and the struggle is immense. She mentions to someone at some point that she should commit suicide. Now, I don't know how this mention was. Was it, I'm going to kill myself? Or was it something like, I should just end it all? I often make the comment that I should just jump out a window. It doesn't mean I actually want to or will. I have a dark sense of humor. Most depressed people do. So, without context, it's difficult to know for sure. However, since her family mentioned it, it seems safe to believe they took it seriously. As far as I can tell, nothing ever happened. There wasn't a suicide attempt in anything I read other than that assertion by the cruise line. So what did Marion do? She went off for a month, didn't tell anyone, and took the time to clear her head, get rid of the negativity, and then she came striding back in. Her mood was improved, her life was back on track, and she was getting things done. The only thing I can find that was recently negative in her life is that she was out of work. And frankly, I don't know if that had been for 6 months or 6 days. There's really no data on it, but it does play a role in determining her state of mind, even though she had a trust fund to fall back on and good investments that she had made. She wasn't going poor. Now, I can't outright dismiss Marion's depression. Maybe it got worse, maybe it got better. We'll never really know. However, we do know that the last time she was struggling, she ran off for a month without telling anyone she was doing it. So in August of 2004, she buys a round-trip plane ticket, flies to Seattle, boards a cruise ship that's going for 7 days, and then vanishes sometime between 8 p.m. and 10:30 a.m. the second and third day. She didn't bring much with her. She didn't spend any money on her sea pass. She didn't seem interested in socializing very much. Kinda seems like someone who's just looking for an escape, right? Now, some have pointed out her lack of luggage as a sign that she was planning to end her own life, and while I do find it strange she brought so little with her, the cruise ship did have a mall, so maybe she was planning to buy some clothes when she was there. I can't say for sure. Seems like a strange suicide plan though, doesn't it? Why not do it someplace close to home or at home? Also, why choose drowning? I mean, everyone has their own predilections, but that just seems like a terrible way to go to me. More than 44,000 people in the United States commit suicide each year, according to data from the CDC. Of that 44,000, 1% do so by drowning. That's approximately 440 people under these data sets. So, sure, Marion could be in that 1%, but maybe she wasn't. Suicides are handled in different ways by different people, and there's a lot of factors involved. State of mind, socioeconomic status, geographic location, social circle, etc. According to the CDC, 9.3 million adults in the US have suicidal thoughts each year. That's 3.9% of the entire adult population of the country. In the age ranges, 18 to 25-year-olds represent the highest percentage at 7.4. 26 to 49-year-olds are second at 4%. It's difficult to ascertain how many people make a plan to commit suicide rather than deciding to do it one day without a plan, since most suicidal people don't tell others about their plans. However, most suicidal people don't fly 3,000 miles, board a cruise ship, and risk being seen, stopped, or saved in the process. We're never going to know here. There's no way to determine any of this, what was going on in Marion's mind, why or how she may have wanted to take her own life. It's simply my perspective that there are easier ways that are going to leave much less of a trail if that's truly what she wanted to do. I have a hard time wrapping my head around it all, but the fact of the matter is, we can't rule it out. Were Marion to have committed suicide by jumping into the ocean, the most likely place seems to be the open-air deck closest to her room, which presented a 100-foot drop into the ocean. According to everything I've read, this is somewhat variable. You could jump 100 feet, land, and be physically uninjured. You could hit the wrong angle and break a bone or knock yourself unconscious. I suppose it depends really on how you jump, whether it's straight down legs first or head first. However, this isn't a guaranteed death by any stretch of the imagination, let alone a painless one. It seems like a strange choice to make, and while it's easy to say a suicidal person isn't thinking clearly, if this was her plan all along, she had at least 96 hours to consider it, possibly more. She had to decide it was going to be a cruise ship. She calls and books her flight 2 days before the trip, flies out there, boards the ship, and then spends approximately 36 to 40 hours on the ship itself. Why not jump the first night if that was the plan? Why not get a room that has a private balcony? All right, maybe they were sold out. I can't say for sure because the cruise line has been absolute trash about sharing any information pertinent to this case. There's too many questions here, and we could go on discussing and analyzing it forever. The only thing we can really say is that suicidal people are not thinking logically, and so any choices made simply wouldn't make sense to anyone who can't fully comprehend that mindset. I think it's best to leave this as a possibility and move on to the next theory, but I'd love to hear what you think about this possibility, let alone the whole case in general. For some, there are a lot of possibilities when it comes to Marion disembarking from the ship, either in Vancouver or elsewhere, possibly of her own decision. Maybe she could have been lured off too. She didn't seem huge into socializing, so had she stepped off the ship, she could have found herself wandering around in an area by herself that made her an easier target. She could have gotten off with someone who had bad intentions, and later that person came walking back on and no one noticed. Of course, how would Marion have wandered off that ship in just her underwear without anyone remembering that? Then again, how the hell do we even know what anyone on that ship saw or didn't see? Maybe someone bought her clothes. Maybe someone lent her clothes. maybe that'll just never make sense to me no matter how many times I think about it. The way they kept track of people getting on and off the ship wasn't exactly airtight. Now, partially because of Marion's case, passengers have to scan ID cards when they leave and return to ships now. But at that time, it was just kept track of, and we don't even know how. Was someone standing there asking names and writing them down? I don't know. But whatever the method, much like everything else with this particular cruise line, it certainly doesn't seem efficient or intelligent. I guess it's a question of, did Marion walk off the ship with plans to return and something stopped her, or was she planning to just disappear? The latter seems a little strange considering how close she was with her daughter, talking every day, but hell, it's weird how she planned this whole trip and not only didn't tell her daughter, but didn't call either. This is one of those cases where almost nothing makes sense, and this particular theory is completely possible, but like the rest of it, there's just no evidence one way or another. So sure, Marion could have gotten off at any stop or in Vancouver where they didn't even try to keep track of who disembarked. While some believe it was suicide, and others believe something happened to Marion off the ship, whether it was by her own choice or not, for others, there is only one answer that makes any sense: foul play. Cruise ships offer a lot of different possibilities in terms of meeting other people. They're like traveling hotels with tons of activities and places to go. Now, according to what we know, if Marion did leave her room, she certainly didn't leave it a lot. So there's really three possibilities here. Either Marion met someone randomly on the cruise, made plans to link up with someone there that she already knew, or maybe developed a relationship with a crew member. Beginning at the top, you never know what kind of a person you're going to meet in any given situation, let alone on a cruise. There's certainly a good chance you've got someone on that ship who's looking for trouble, and you've got a lot of people who might find themselves in trouble. There's usually a good amount of alcohol flowing on cruises, so it's not impossible to imagine someone could have had too much to drink, was hanging out with or encountered Marion, and something went wrong. Remember, of all the crimes committed on cruise ships, 45% of them are sexual assaults. So we can't rule out that someone could have been trying to assault Marion and either she fought back, or the attacker got scared, or any myriad of other possibilities, and it all led to Marion being thrown overboard. I don't think this is outside of the realm of possibility, and knowing how terrible cruise ships are at handling disappearances, it's not like anyone's going to be the wiser, especially with the victim gone. A random crime is completely possible. Then, there's the angle where she may have been going there specifically to spend time with someone. Marion was notoriously private about her life, so it's entirely possible she had either made plans with someone to join them on a cruise, or that person was going on a cruise, and in the last-minute discussion, Marion decided to throw caution to the wind and go along with them. Of course, it does raise some questions as to why she'd have booked a different cabin. Then again, maybe that's a smart thing to do in case things don't work out. You're not trapped in a room with that person for a whole week. Unfortunately, there's no way of knowing what passengers may or may not have seen. We have no reported sightings of Marion being with anyone, but the only accounts we actually have of Marion even being on the ship are from the cabin attendant and his assistant. So, it's fully possible Marion planned to spend the cruise with someone she knew. There's no information about whether or not authorities examined her computer, looked for dating sites, emails, correspondence with any random guy. I'd like to believe this was done, and based on the fact that she had computer disks with her poetry on them, it seems a safe bet that she had a personal computer. However, we simply can't know any of that. This information may have been easier to obtain had the cruise line shared any information about the passengers besides their names. Now, maybe that's a matter of privacy, but I'm sure police could have gotten their hands on those records. Then again, how do we even know the list of names given to the family were people that were actually on Marion's cruise? The cruise line was so obstructive in what information they gave out, I wouldn't be shocked if that was just a random list anyway. And while it would be nice to have tracked them all down, that's a very time-consuming job, and I doubt investigators were going to commit that much time to a case for which they had basically no evidence. If it wasn't a total stranger, at least in the sense of a random passenger, and it wasn't someone Marion already knew, what about the possibility of a crew member? Now, I don't know how reliable it is, but the family did hear from a crew member who said the talk amongst the crew was that someone on the crew itself was connected to Marion. This possibility has always intrigued me. A crew member meets Marion, something happens between them, and she's disposed of, either by being thrown overboard or in some other way. It's not such a strange angle to take, especially when you consider all of the lengths the cruise line went to conceal information from the family. Now, her steward, Domingo Montero, seemed genuinely concerned about her disappearance and reported her missing 5 times in 5 days. It seems unlikely that this guy's going to go to such great lengths to try and report her missing if he was involved. However, what about the supervisor who refused to file that report? You know, the same guy that took all of her personal effects, which included that manila envelope that strangely disappeared? Remember how Montero knocked on her door one morning and she opened it wearing only a blouse and underwear? What if she was waiting for someone else? While that's purely speculative on my part, I don't think it's completely out of the question. Surveillance tapes were erased and not even examined. The ship wasn't allowed to be searched until much later, and even the time frame was limited. I'm not calling the cruise line complicit in the crime, but it wouldn't be the first time a corporation has gone to great lengths to protect their image. Plus, how many people want to book passage with a company that employed someone who murdered a passenger? Let's face it, the supervisor had the opportunity and means, no different from any other crew member. However, it was with him that the buck stopped. He was the one who failed to report it like he was supposed to. He was the one who took her personal effects. He was the one who told Montero to just go about his job. A little suspicious, right? Then, when the cruise line finds out about him not reporting anything, they fire him, get him off the ship, and he goes home to Greece, at which point he disappears again. Maybe to another cruise line, but I've never seen any documentation that he was ever interviewed by authorities. It's also strange that he's never been named. Maybe that's to protect his privacy in some way, but several other people on the cruise that day have been named. Several of them gave depositions over the phone. Why not this guy? Ultimately, this is a very curious loose end of the case, and sadly, we simply don't have any of the answers in relation to this crew member, or truly, most of the crew members and their comings and goings during the days that Marion was on the ship. Also, who exactly took the tray and dishes out of Marion's room? Just a strange detail. Maybe it was the kind of situation where you put them just outside of your door, like in a hotel, and someone comes along and takes them. But if that's the case, why did Montero think it was so strange? Yet another question with no answer. Merrian Carver booked passage on a cruise ship and disappeared within 48 hours. The cruise line seems disinterested in cooperating, authorities don't have very much to work on, foreign-run ships don't fall under the United States jurisdiction, and all evidence related to the case is gone or destroyed, such as surveillance footage and some of Marion's personal effects. It's an endless pit of possibilities, doubts, suspicions, and curiosities, with only one fact that spans the gamut for everything. A family lost their daughter, their sister, and their mother, and no one has ever presented an answer to alleviate their painful wonders. Sadly, this may be one of those cases which forever remains open, unsolved, and very cold, unless someone finally comes forward and tells everything that they know. If you're looking for more information about the disappearance of Merrian Carver, there are several newspaper articles available and a lot of interviews with her father, Kendall Carver. If you have any information about the disappearance of Merrian Carver, please contact the Cambridge, Massachusetts Police Department at 617-349-3211 or the Alaska Missing Persons Clearinghouse at 907-269-5058. What do you believe happened? Tweet me at TraceEvPod, message me on Instagram at TraceEvidencePod, comment in the Facebook group, or email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. Lately, a lot of people have been asking me about the availability of Trace Evidence merchandise. In order to view Trace Evidence merchandise, you have two options. You can go to traceevidence.threadless.com or go to the website at trace-evidence.com and click on the merch link for all purchasing options. If you're looking to support Trace Evidence and you want access to ad-free episodes and monthly bonus episodes in addition to receiving Trace Evidence stickers and merchandise, please visit patreon.com/traceevidence. It's now time to thank our amazing Patreon producers for their incredible support that keeps this show going. Special thanks to Alicia Lorraine, Brittany Bivens, Brian Kemmerling, Christine Greco, Krista Colvin, Diane Dyson, Eamon Brady, Emily Smith, Emma Vachon, Gerald Lopez Barbosa, Jessica Shannon, Jessica Yunt, Nick Mohar Schurz, Pamela Coburn, Quinn McBreen, Robbie Blue, Roberta Jansen, Samantha Ford, Stephanie Segrist, Tara Doble, Tom Archer, Tracy Woods, and Stephen Weiland. That's going to do it for this week's episode. Make sure to follow me on social media at TraceEvPod on Twitter, Trace Evidence Pod on Instagram, Trace Evidence Podcast on YouTube, or search Facebook for Trace Evidence Podcast. For questions, comments, case suggestions, email me at traceevidencepod@gmail.com. All social media links, contact forms, merchandise links, and more are available on the website at trace-evidence.com. I want to thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll join me next week for another unsolved case on the next episode of Trace Evidence.